Welcome back, Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut. We're here to do an episode. It is getting close to Pesach, but Maseches Makkos is starting this week, and we can't not do the original style episode that Rabbi Brut started with, which is his preview of how Maseches Makkos was learned throughout the generations, with Sfarim, some interesting old Sfarim, new Sfarim, and everything else that's on his mind. This has not been dedicated. We're still looking for a sponsor. It can be anonymous. We can put your name onto it. But even more importantly, check out Rabbi Brut's Musings of a Book Collector, new release about 4 special Haggadot on your bookshelf, or maybe not yet on your bookshelf, but maybe you want to consider putting on your bookshelf after you listen to Rabbi Brut's analysis of the Haggadot that have come out this year. Only 4 of them. He probably could do 54 of them, but he's sparing you, and he only did 4. So Rabbi Brut will tell us exactly where to find them. And without further ado, Rabbi Brut, welcome back.
Okay, so we're going to begin with Maseches Makkos over here. So Makkos is the first question that people ask is this part of Maseches Sanhedrin? So interestingly enough, many years ago, I come across, I'm learning, we recently recorded an episode about Reuven Margolis. So I was learning Yisoid HaMishnah V'Arichoseh, one of his beautiful svarim. And then he brings down that the Ralbag in Parshas Mishpatim calls that Masechta Sanhedrin was really 13 prakim, and the last 3 prakim were what we have as Makkos. And there's 2 places in the Ralbag such a statement.
I don't want to interrupt, but I said that you're going to tell people where they can find your Haggadah episode, and if they don't listen till the end, they're not going to hear where. So maybe just tell them now and then continue Makkos.
No problem. We'll tell them right now. Basically, you go on All Daf website, you search for in the All Daf series, search for Musings of a Book Collector, episode number 4. I deal with 4 new Haggadahs that just came out. Okay, so now returning back to the story at hand, Masechtas Makkos. So the question is, what's going on? Is it part of Masechtas Sanhedrin? So I came across, Reuven Margolis brings down the Ralbag in 2 places where he says that Sanhedrin was really a 13 parak Masechta, with the 3 prakim that we have as Makkos was his Sanhedrin. Okay, I later on come across the Ralbag in the beginning of his Parish of Chumash, where there it sounds like he says that that's Sanhedrin, and then there's Makkos with 3 prakim. So what's going on over here? So, okay, maybe Reuven Margolis didn't know about it. I don't know. More recently, there's been a lot of work done on the Ralbag al Torah, and it turns out that someone went ahead and changed in the manuscripts. Taka says in all the places the Ralbag had Masechta Sanhedrin, a 13 parak Masechta. Whereas someone went ahead and changed, and we find this many times, that people in the manuscript world, when it came to print, they would change things without even telling you based on what they knew. So they knew, Masechtas Makkos is its own Masechta. So they did you the favor. In one of the places, they changed it to be the way it is now today, which is Sanhedrin and Makkos. But if you look in other places in Ralbag, they didn't change it over there. Okay. Anyway, the point is that there's other Makairis, such a thing Reuven Margolis brings down, Lamashal, a Ramban, a Rajba, that also, that according to them, possibly such a Maramakim. But the Rambam in Parish HaMishnayos, in his Akdam to Parish HaMishnayos, which I think Reuven Margolis also quotes, he says that it's not that there are those that are mitzarefet and counted as one, but it's not. It's own. It's ein enachain. It's a masechta b'fnei atzmai. This is what the Rambam goes with in his Chibur Hagdam l'Perish HaMishnayos. Okay, now, so you can look at this in Reuven Margolis and his Yisod Mishnah V'Richoseh, and he also talks about this in the beginning of Margolis Hayam, and in a few other places in Margolis Hayam about this. One other Maramakim, because it's just now his Yartzeit, Shol Lieberman, he also has some Gishmak Maramakim about this in a Chibur called Hilchos HaYerushalmi LaRambam. In the back of the Sefer, there's an Espach Beis, where he talks about Bichlal the Yerushalmi on Masechtas Makkos. If you look, it's very short, what's pshat, so he has a whole beautiful piece about it, Kedarka B'Kodesh, and in there he also talks about this Nakuda of his Masechtas Makkos, its own Masechta. Is it attached to Sanhedrin? Not attached to Sanhedrin, has some more Maramakim. Anyway, so this is one of the first questions that people discuss. Another question that we always discuss in these kind of episodes is the Nusach of the Gemara. Is there anyone that dealt with the manuscripts of the Gemara? So Baruch Hashem, we still have the Diktukei Seifrim, which we've spoken about many different times. We also have Meir Ish Shalom in 1888 puts out a based on the manuscripts and the Rishonim, what's called an academic version of Masechtas Makkos. Okay, moving right along to Rashi. So we've already mentioned in previous episodes of this series that there's a discussion when Rashi dies, and everyone knows towards the end of Makkos he dies. When does he die? He dies in other Masechtas. We've already spoken about it, but for the most part, most of Rashi in this Masechta is Rashi. And this work has been done about this Masechta by Yirmiyahu Malachi, and I'm more than happy to send at least one article of his that I have on Rashi on Masechtas Makkos. Okay, so this is the Gemara and this is Rashi. Which Rishonim do they have throughout the generations? So I always quote, I'm fond of quoting the Shem Agdolim from the Chida on different Masechtas. It gives you the breakdown of the Rishonim that he saw. A lot of times they were manuscripts, sometimes in print. Here he mentions is the Ramban and the Ritva. Ramban is first published in, I believe, 1801. The Chida says it's full of mistakes, full of printing mistakes. L'maisa, our generation, which is something that I always mention in every episode of these things, or Zeicha, tons of manuscripts have been discovered. So Chashav Yidra Moshe Hershler publishes it based on a few different manuscripts, and one could read his introduction to see all the things that they fixed up throughout of the mistakes that crept in. The Ritva, it's published earlier in 1762. Interestingly enough, today there is no, which is not so common. Most of the time, the Ritva, we do have manuscripts of it, but we do not for this Masechta. And 1939, a Yid Reb Chaim Yitzchak Bloch, he puts out an edition. He also does the Ritva on Moed Katan and Megillah, and he writes Chashava Aris on the whole Masechta. Who is he? He was a Rosh Yeshiva in Lita, and he's in different places. He learned in Volozhin, Talmud of Reb Chaim. He had smicha from Reb Lezer Mitels. And for those that want to hear all about Reb Lezer Mitels, if you buy this issue of Mishpacha of L'Kavod Yantif, you could have from our dear friend Dovi Sapir, wrote a whole massive arichos about Reb Lezer Telzer. So this is a Talmud of his, it seems, or at least he got smicha from him, and he was Rosh Yeshiva in Lita. He ends up getting to America. In America, it seems he plugged away. He was a Rav in Jersey City, and he put out these Masechtas, Makkos, Megillah, Moed Katan with Ha'aris. And once again, something that I've mentioned time and time again, there must be some connection with Volozhin. It probably is the influence of the Netziv, although it says over here that he's a Talmud of Reb Chaim. Okay. Anyway, so that's what the Ritva and the Ramban did. One of my favorite questions in all these episodes always is, what happens? Does anything else happen? So already, way back in the 1860s, we start with Rabbeinu Chananel. And turns out, this is where, today we take for granted Rabbeinu Chananel. You open up Yeshas Vilna and many Masechtas, and you have Rabbeinu Chananel. But where did this even come from? So we spoke a little bit about it in the episodes of Chaim Kanievsky, but it starts really on Masechtas Makkos. What happens is, the great Reb David Tzvi Hoffman publishes in 1876 for the 25th thing of the, what's his name? Rabbi Israel Hilzenheimer is the Rav, a special occasion. They put out Torah of Rabbeinu Chananel, including material of his in Masechtas Makkos for the first time. Okay, and some other material on Yecheskel and Rabbeinu Chananel Torah. Okay. Now, where does he get it? They had a manuscript. Fine. Just a few years later, Shas Vilna starts, and they get Rishus, and they publish the material from this work that David Tzvi Hoffman did, and they put it in. Now, the way things always work is that over time, it seems that the Ha'aris, they didn't publish all of David Tzvi Hoffman's Ha'aris, and they have other Ha'aris from the great Rosh Shlomo Kayin Av Bezdin in Vilna, head Vadayan in Vilna, the author of the Cheshik Shlomo, who was Yedua, he worked on it also. But anyway, so finally, in a journal called Yusha Seinu, in just literally 2 years ago, some family member of Rav David Tzvi Hoffman publishes the Ha'aris that were not published. They were only published in 1876, but were not published in Shas Vilna. So he puts them back on the map, so to speak. He gives you Rav David Tzvi Hoffman's Ha'aris on Rabbeinu Chananel, and a theme that you'll see a few times right away, something that I mentioned a bunch of times. The Rabbeinu Chananel is the Makar for a Rambam. So you'll see here a few times David Tzvi Hoffman points to a Rambam, like this, Miyashiv a Rambam with this Rabbeinu Chananel. And there's also some Chuvas manuscript relating to some other Tyrus of Rabbeinu Chananel. So one can find this in Yusha Seinu in the volume 12 that came out a few years ago. So that's one thing already. Now, in Masechta Sanhedrin, we already gave credit to Amayr Dika Machon Harry Fischel. And Masechta Sanhedrin, they put out like 7 volumes. So what happens over here? Turns out they did the same for Masechtas Makkos. They put out the Real Mandri, the Ri Melonil. They redo the Ritva. And so far, that's some of their volumes. Okay, Baruch Hashem. So they put some Rishonim on the map, so to speak. Now, besides Rashi, on every Masechta, most Masechtas, we have Taisus. So standard in many Masechtas, we have Taisus Rush. So in this Masechta, we do not have the Taisus Rush, but we have a few Taisus in. It's called Taisus Shantz, published way back, but again, a critical edition is put out by this Machon Harry Fischel, and what they discover a major work of Rabbeinu Peretz. So we now have in the world to understand Taisus Kiyadua. You have Rabbeinu Peretz and what they call Taisus Shantz. It's some nusach of Rabbeinu Peretz possibly. So now the Masechta is slowly become already you have Rabbeinu Chananel and you have at least two Taisus, and besides the standard Taisus, it's getting a little bit more. And then in the 60s comes out a work, a Meiri from manuscript, which we've mentioned many times, and this is put out by Yid Reb Shimon Strilowitz. So this was a Gaon Olam. He was a Talmud of a cook. He died tragically very young. He worked for Mechon, the Encyclopedia Talmudis, Mechon Talmud Israeli. Reb Zevin in the Meiri, his edition of the Meiri with his beautiful aris. Reb Zevin writes a whole beautiful arichos. I have to mention Reb Zevin, otherwise forget about it. And then a few years back, they put out a beautiful volume called Mea Makar, which has a lot of his Torah of this great Reb Shimon Strilowitz, and his connection with his Rebbe Rav Kook also. Okay, so anyway, so this Meiri, and then it was published again, so we now have a Meiri and on Maseches Makkos, so now we're getting a few more Rishonim, and there's some more. Okay. Now, one of the Yidden that I never really discussed much about him, which is worthy of discussing about Arichos, is a Yid, Professor Eliezer Horowitz. He's very famous for publishing different Rishonim that he discovers, and what he discovers in this Masechta, one of the things is Rabbeinu Yitzchak Kusha. I'm getting the name wrong, obviously. I break my teeth all the time on it. And I think it was from the Geniza, the Kaira Geniza. It seems he's considered to be a Talmud of the Ramban. So he publishes this on this Masechta. So we Baruch Hashem, over time we got some Rishonim. What's the story with Achronim? So yes, we have a Pnei Yeshua. B'chlal was the Masechta learned. So I don't know. I don't have, a lot of times I try to find documentation if the Achronim learned it. Do we have early Achronim other than the Pnei Yeshua writing about it? So we'll see shortly about one, but we don't really have so much. Now, Sanhedrin, we saw an explosion of different things, but they only happened very late. There weren't so many Svarim on Sanhedrin, and it wasn't really learned throughout the generations. So we have the great Aruch LaNer. So he publishes Kiyadua, a bunch of Perushim of his on the different Masechtas and Shas. So we've already quoted in our episode devoted just to him that he has a beautiful Akdama. And over there he says it seems that there was a certain geschmack to learn Makkos. It could be because it's small. And he says very few people, very few Achrayim handled it. And the only reason that we really have is the Ritva, as I mentioned earlier, because that's all he had. Now, so the Aruch LaNer, he's one of the go-to Svarim on this Masechta, and Kiyadua, the Aruch LaNer doesn't skip even Agad to Gemara, so there's also that. And of course, life wouldn't be simple, is that Mechon Yerushalayim published a Aruch LaNer with many ha'aris of his that they found in a Ksav Yad of his with new materials. Always finding new materials, not only Rishonim, also Tachreinim. Aruch LaNer was zeichet that many new materials have come to light. Recently, Mechon Meshis Rabbarim put out a whole volume of his Torah, and Mechon Yerushalayim put out a volume on Makkos I just mentioned. Fine. Another sefer, which comes out in 1899, is called Sich Yitzchak, and we don't have really any other material from this person. Who is this? Reb Yitzchak Chiyus. Who is he? He's the son of the Meretz Chayes. So he's born in 1842. He dies in 1901, so he doesn't live all that long, but he was a big Rosh Yeshiva. He had thousands, he had many, hundreds of Talmidim. He didn't want to become a Rav until Seif Yamav. He becomes Rav of Broid, and it seems that at least part of his time he was wealthy, so he supported his Talmidim to learn by him. Reaching out to one of the mumchim of the Meretz Chayes in the world is a friend of mine, Yitzchak Rosenblum. So I asked him about him. Does he have any good information about him? So he told me that it's interesting is that although he's familiar with his father, his style is not at all similar to the Meretz Chayes. Maybe he quotes him even once or twice by name. You could see he's familiar with his stuff, but his Mahalach Halimud is not Meretz Chayes. It's much more Galicianer style learning at that time. And Kiyadua, the great hiker of Galicianer, Yidden, who died recently in his work, Mari Galizia or Meir Wunder. So he has a nice entry, a few columns on this tremendous Yid with all the information that he dug up about him. Okay. So basically, it's not looking all that good. You have a Pnei Yeshua, Aruch LaNer, and Sich Yitzchak. 1907, the Chafetz Chaim, which we spoke about in one of our early episodes of Masechtas Yuma, while looking for materials on Seder Kachim, he hears about that in Vilna. There was a Ksav Yad of the Shargis Ari called Gvurus Ari. And I think Reb Chaim Oizer or his father, they were very into it when they used to learn from manuscript even. So the Chafetz Chaim goes ahead and publishes it because he was to put a nicely a kachim junkie, so he was looking for any materials out there for kachim related, so he publishes it. And once there was in this material, there was a whole chibur on Maseches Makkos, he publishes that too. And Reb Leib, his son, which I'm always fond of quoting in his biography and his father, he also mentions this Nakuda. Okay, so this is yet another work that comes to light on this Masechta, but only in 1907. So, as opposed to many other episodes where I'm able to give you a list of long achronim, here I have to go a different style and I have to quote some more relatively contemporary works. So number one is a work that I'm very, very fond of. Rabbi Yitzchak Arieli Zeinayim LaMishpat. There are many different Masechtas. He was zeicher to learn Shas Be'iyun with Rav Kook. And his chibur on many different Masechtas, there's a lot to say about this great Chashav Yid. He was very involved with the Yeshivas Merkaz Arav, and Rabbi Eitam Henkin Hashem Yinkam Damai wrote a few different articles that were published after he was killed, and they're available in Hebrew and in English. And the point is, he was a great guide, and his farm are also very special. They're available on Hebrew books, and on Makkos is very useful Hebrew. Now, just to list a few more Marmakaimis and to conclude is as follows. This Masechta. It has less than 30 blot, and there's a lot of, it's a very big nakuda to finish it, because it's a small Masechta. Even as I said, the Archlener I think even emphasizes this. It's a small Masechta, so people want to finish it. So Eitzim Mefarshei Talmud, the whole project began, I believe, with Masechtas Makkos. Which is a beautiful project where they collect tons of, called the Big Green Monster or whatever the some people mezalzel in it. We spoke about if it's good for the Jews or bad for the Jews, looking at these type of svarim. We mentioned already in more than one episode of Chaim Kanievsky, Likud svarim. But this is where it began in Masechtas Makkos. The raid on Masechtas Makkos, they collect it. Now, how were they able to do it? So there was another Yid, his name in a work called Imre Binyamin, who died very recently. His name was Reb Meir Binyamin Guzik, who died in Yerushalayim. He learned in Panovich, and he was a prolific writer, a great lamdan, wrote on many of the Yeshivish Masechtas, and one of the Masechtas that it seems it became like the Yadua was his work, Imre Binyamin, on Makkos, a massive work, not only in Amkos and Lamdas, also tons of Marmakaimis, which we're talking about way before it's a Chachma, Hebrew books, and Google books, so they had a source to help them out, and they give credit to this in the beginning of their work. So that's Imre Binyamin. Art Scroll also began, I believe, in Masechtas Makkos. Rabbi Yisrael Reisman, my rabbi, growing up, he wrote the first volume of Makkos, and he wrote a few other volumes before Art Scroll became and identified and figured out themselves where they're heading. Now, I remember when I was a bacher learning Masechtas Makkos in Camp Arshag, I was able to hear shiurim from Reb Zelig Epstein at the time. So at that time, Mamish came out, also a sefer that the Olam Yeshivas, at least in those years, was crazy into, a massive work of Reb Shmuel Rozovsky on the Masechta. You'd say at that time, the Torah of Reb Shmuel Rozovsky was always known that Reb Shmuel Rozovsky gave amazing shiurim, but they were in these like stencil formats. They weren't so well written. And I think Makkos is when it really took off. They put out this massive encyclopedic work. It was 700-800 pages. And I remember buying it, going through it, and everyone would say at that time, this was the sefer. It's everything. There was nothing that he wasn't on. Signed the Lumda, signed everything. And I remember at that time, so this is way back in Camp Arshraga, I was about 20, so going back over 25 years ago. So there was such a thing called tapes. This is before computers and before all these different things. So I collected, amongst other things, tapes of different Gedolim. So I had a partner at that time in Camp Arshraga, the Rosh Koil of Tervadas. His name is Reb Leiba Williger. He loved tapes, to listen to tapes of Gedolim. So what was very chashuv was he got hooked into somehow a private collection of Reb Shmuel Rozovsky tapes of Panovich, a private Panovich collection. And I remember he gave me a few to listen to, and I was blown away. And the nakuda was, sometimes you always hear stories, and after you listen to one, all the stories on Yushiv, there was not a shred of exaggeration. The unbelievable orator skills that he had, the command, the confidence. You could hear the Olam tummeling, and a guy screaming to try to get him, and he's ripping without batting an eyelash. Bring me out the Rambam. And he defends himself. He didn't get flustered. This is a true guy, one of the Gedolei Rosh Yeshivas of the yeshiva world after World War II. And I listened to this tape. There's no exaggerations, man. It was a very special treat. Now, one other sefer to mention is from Nassim Gestetner, Nice Imperia. And the chiddush to me of this sefer, this is a chashuv, a paisik, Lahiris Nasan of Bnei Brak, and he says on the cover, he's using manuscripts of Rashi and Tosfos. This is when you think about it, the fascinating thing that a yid of that camp, so to speak, using these types of material. So these are just some of the materials. Of course, searching on Eitzah Chachma and Hebrew books, you find that Ein L'Davar Soif, how many different people have written Chiburim, Contrasim about this Masechta. It's a beautiful Masechta. People like it. I'm waiting to hear a good cheshbon, what it is, what's the Nakuda in this Masechta. Part of it has to do with the size, because the end is in sight, but there must be some other thing that I'm waiting to see, some article or some Gishmakataina of a professional tremendous Talmud Chacham to explain what's the attraction to this Masechta, because it definitely has an attraction. To be Messiah with one last thing, we're holding right before Pesach. And as we mentioned at the outset, that I just recorded an episode of 4 Haggadahs. So one Haggadah that I might have mentioned in the episode that we gave over here a few years back about the bibliography of various important Haggadahs is the Aruch HaShulchan Haggadah. I remember when I was 13 and I got this Haggadah, I couldn't put it down. Unbelievable Haggadahs. Now, one of the pieces that I read in that point in time was relating to Maseches Makkos. At the end of Makkos, we talk about Rabbi Kiva and the Chachamim, and they're all sad, and there's all different Nakudas with what's going on. They're seeing the Churban, and Rabbi Kiva smiling, happy. And the Leila Seder, there's a famous thing we know. Why are they going to Bnei Brak? Vas Epis, they went to Rabbi Kiva. What's going on? So Aruch HaShulchan has a whole mahalach that basically he had a positive outlook. They were coming to him to get this positive outlook. Where do we see this positive outlook? So it's galus how the Aruch HaShulchan puts it down, but it's based on these sugyas at the end of Makkos. And rather, if you look at the Aruch LaNer does talk about this positive aspects of Rebbe Kiva, but he doesn't go this step, this knech of the Aruch LaNer, of the Aruch HaShulchan, which ties it to, that's why they were going to Rebbe Kiva. I mean, to say it didn't make sense. Why they're going to Rebbe Kiva? Answer is to calm them down. It looks bleak. It looks bad. Don't worry. So again, we're in the situation we are in. And sometimes it looks bad. So here's a nakuda just to be Messiah from the Aruch HaShulchan, relating to the end of Makkos, which is around the corner, literally in 23 days or something from when we begin very soon.
Okay, thank you very much, and especially your fond memories of Shmuel Rozovsky's Sefer. Yes, it's an incredible Sefer, must-have on your stender as you learn Masechtas Makkos. And this is something, that kids have been learning. It's one of the Masechtas that kids, boys, elementary school, high school, so it's, like you said, it's a Masechta that draws people in, and people really enjoy learning it. So we wish the many people who are embarking, whether they're seasoned Daf Yomi learners, whether they're taking on Daf Yomi for Makkos, especially this year, where it's over Pesach and over vacation, a lot of downtime, certainly something to take on, and all the jokes that are out there, Makkos, and how are you going to give Makkos? Did you mention if it's called Makkos or Malkis? Like
I didn't get into that. I actually had a chaloim, but as of now, I'm not doing it, is to record an episode all about Makkos, the concept of Makkos throughout the generations, which is, we find that they actually did give Makkos. In Halacha, it's brought down the most famous thing people don't realize, but it's out of Yom, there are places, Erev Rosh Hashanah, Erev Yom Kippur, that people get Makkos. And I've quoted, I believe, once a story where there was people, they didn't like their Rebbe, so they arranged that they should give the Makkos for this Rebbe. And then when afterwards he found out who that was them, whatever. But anyway, the point is, Makkos, it was a punishment that was given, even though Bezdin, the power of Bezdin throughout the generations, but we'll have to wait to a different time to give such episode. I'll call upon it.
Okay.
So Makkos, Malkis, etc.
We'll keep the lashes for next time.
Right, exactly.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a wonderful Yom Tif.